the power behind the curtain. In the story of America's rise to economic dominance, there are names everyone knows: presidents, inventors, generals. But behind the curtain of history, shaping the financial backbone of the nation, stands one man whose influence was so vast, so far-reaching, that it's hard to imagine modern America without him. His name was John Pierpont Morgan, better known as J.P. Morgan. More than just a banker, Morgan was a financial architect. He didn't just move money. He moved entire industries, stabilized the markets when they trembled, and even bailed out the U.S. government itself. His life raises fascinating questions. How can one man command such power? And what does it take to finance the growth of a nation? To answer those questions, we need to journey back to the world of the 19th century, a time of railroads, robber barons, and the birth of American capitalism. The making of a banker. John Pierpont Morgan was born in 1837 into a family that was already steeped in finance. His father, Junius Morgan, was an influential international banker who gave young Pierpont not just wealth, but a pathway into the world of global capital. From an early age, J.P. was educated in Europe, where he absorbed the principles of finance in the bustling markets of London and Paris. This European education gave him a rare advantage. While most American financiers were focused on short-term profit, Morgan learned the disciplined, structured methods of European banking. He returned to America with a vision: to bring order to a chaotic, fast-growing economy. It's important to remember that the United States in the mid-19th century was a nation still finding its footing. The Civil War had torn the country apart. Railroads were crisscrossing the landscape, and new industries were springing up faster than anyone could regulate them. Chaos was everywhere. But chaos is where Morgan thrived. Railroads, taming the iron giants. The railroads were the lifeblood of America's growth, but by the late 1800s, they were also a mess. Too many companies, too much debt, and constant bankruptcies left the industry unstable. Investors were losing confidence, and without railroads, the entire nation's commerce was at risk. J.P. Morgan saw an opportunity. He didn't invent the railroads. He reorganized them. Using his influence, he forced competing companies to consolidate, cut waste, and create efficiency. His process, known as Morganization, turned chaotic industries into stable, profitable enterprises. Take the New York Central Railroad, for example. Under Morgan's guidance, it became a powerhouse of American transportation, setting the standard for how railroads could be run efficiently. By stabilizing railroads, Morgan wasn't just making money. He was laying the tracks, quite literally, for America's economic expansion. But Morgan's ambitions didn't stop with trains. His eyes turned to steel, the very backbone of industrial America. Steel, forging an empire. At the turn of the 20th century, steel was the most important material in the world. It built skyscrapers, bridges, and ships, and no one produced more steel than Andrew Carnegie. Yet Carnegie's empire was chaotic, run more like a personal fiefdom than a modern corporation. Morgan saw an opportunity to create something bigger. In 1901, he negotiated one of the largest deals in history, buying Carnegie Steel for nearly $500 million. From this, he created U.S. Steel, the first billion-dollar corporation in America. This wasn't just business, it was history. For the first time, a single company had the resources to shape the skyline of New York City, the bridges across the Mississippi, and the tools of modern warfare. Morgan's vision had taken steel from a fragmented industry into an industrial giant that symbolized America's might. But Morgan wasn't just interested in industries. He had his eyes on something even bigger: the financial stability of the entire United States, saving the nation's finances. In 1895, the U.S. government was facing a crisis. The gold reserves, which backed the dollar, were dangerously low. Panic spread through the markets, and confidence in the U.S. Treasury was collapsing. The nation was on the brink of financial ruin. And then, J.P. Morgan stepped in. Using his immense network of international connections, he brokered a deal to supply the U.S. Treasury with $65 million in gold. The crisis was averted. Think about that for a moment. A private banker single-handedly stabilized the finances of the United States government. This act cemented Morgan's reputation, not just as a banker, but as the de facto central bank of America. At a time when the Federal Reserve didn't yet exist, Morgan was the lender of last resort. Some saw him as a savior. Others saw him as a symbol of dangerous power, proof that one man could hold the fate of a nation in his hands. Both perspectives carried truth. The Panic of 1907. Morgan as America's central banker. Perhaps the most dramatic example of Morgan's power came in 1907. The stock market was in freefall, banks were failing, and ordinary Americans lined up in panic to withdraw their savings. With no Federal Reserve to stabilize the system, it seemed the entire financial structure of the United States could collapse. Once again, Morgan took command. Gathering the nation's top bankers in his library on Madison Avenue, he locked the doors and refused to let them leave until a rescue plan was devised. Under his leadership, the financial titans agreed to pool resources, inject liquidity into failing institutions, and restore confidence in the system. It worked. The panic subsided, and the U.S. economy survived. But the episode revealed a troubling reality. America was dependent on the will of one man to avoid disaster. The Panic of 1907 was a turning point. It convinced lawmakers that the nation needed a central bank to prevent such reliance on private power. Just a few years later, in 1913, the Federal Reserve was born, a direct consequence of Morgan's dominance, the man behind the power. Who was J.P. Morgan beyond the numbers? Physically imposing, with a piercing gaze and a famously deformed nose, he was not a man people easily forgot. He was known for his temper, his absolute confidence, and his refusal to tolerate fools. Yet he was also an art collector, amassing one of the greatest collections in the world, much of which would later form the foundation of the Morgan Library in New York. Morgan lived in an age of extremes, of vast fortunes and crushing poverty, of dazzling innovation and ruthless exploitation. Some saw him as a titan who built America. Others saw him as a monopolist who concentrated too much power in too few hands. The truth lies somewhere in between. Morgan was both a product of his age and a shaper of it. He used his wealth and vision to bring order to chaos, but he also embodied the inequalities and unchecked power of the Gilded Age. Legacy: the banker who built America. When J.P. Morgan died in 1913, the nation mourned the loss of a financial colossus. His death symbolically closed the chapter on an era when private individuals could command such sweeping influence over the fate of the United States. But his legacy endures. The railroads he stabilized, the steel empire he forged, the financial system he rescued, all became cornerstones of America's rise as a global power. The Federal Reserve, created in the wake of his dominance, stands as a reminder of both his necessity and his danger. J.P. Morgan's story is not just about money. It's about power, vision, and the delicate balance between private ambition and public good. He financed America, not just with dollars, but with the force of his will. And in doing so, he left behind a legacy that still shapes the way we think about finance, industry, and the very nature of economic power.